Hello, everyone. I'm pleased to be speaking today with Amy Gallagher. She's an NHS nurse who has spoken out against woke policies in the UK healthcare system, the NHS. Now, our goal today is to have a thoughtful discussion about how concepts like critical race theory have infiltrated the NHS, the harms caused, and why we need more people like Amy speaking out. Now, of course, there are nuanced perspectives on both sides of this issue, and I appreciate Amy's willingness to engage in constructive dialogue as we seek solutions. Many of us have faced similar concerns, and it's time we call out extremism while affirming shared values of human dignity and equality. So, Amy, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, before everything, Amy, could you just give us a quick snapshot of your background, your trajectory in life, and how you ended up working for the NHS?
Yeah, so I first did a degree in English literature, and I became very interested in psychology through that. I became interested in the ideas of Freud and Jung, and I decided to train as a mental health nurse because I wanted to get real clinical experience of working with mental health patients. So I did I did the training, and then I worked as a nurse in all various settings for about 7 years. And then I started to go back to my original interest, which was psychoanalysis and psychology, and I began training as a psychotherapist. So I did my first 2 years at the Tavistock, and I graduated with a postgraduate diploma in psychotherapy. And then I returned to do the final 2 years of training. And that's where I started to experience quite extreme radical ideas and what people describe as woke ideology, which I had an issue with for quite a while. I'd actually noticed it a little bit when I first did my English literature degree, because we were being taught things like critical theory and quite, Marxist ideas. But from my perspective, then it was kind of just interesting to learn about it, and I didn't necessarily agree with it. But I guess my concern was that these ideas were being used in clinical work within healthcare, and being used in a way that was not evidence-based and was very discriminatory, and very damaging in my view.
We'll talk more about that, Amy, later, but I think we'll step back a bit for the benefit of those who may not be familiar about the term woke. For you, what is woke? Because for me, I think it's just a bit over the top political correctness. That's how I would describe it. Is that the same for you?
Yeah, I guess so. I think the idea of woke kind of speaks to this idea of critical consciousness, which is an idea that comes from Marxist or critical theory, which some people describe as neo-Marxism, which is this idea that you can see the oppression that other people can't see. So you've sort of woken up and you can see that you are oppressed by patriarchy and capitalism and kind of all these oppressions of people, kind of racial oppression and gender-based oppression. It's all around you, and other people can't see it, and you can kind of see it in a way that other people can't. And that's generally kind of what's described by this idea of woke, where it's often people seeing things, I would argue, that sometimes often aren't there, and really looking for oppression where it doesn't necessarily exist. So that's kind of why I know some people don't like the term woke, but for me, in some ways, I think it's quite good in describing this ideology.
Yeah, it's like you're being overly being hypercritical. I think that's how I would describe it. That's why some people call it woke. But you already alluded to earlier what prompted you to speak out against these policies within the NHS, the woke policies. But can you just get into more detail? What really prompted you to speak out against some of the policies and practices within the NHS which you think are woke?
Well, what first came to my attention was a lecture that was sent round called "Whiteness: a Problem for Our Time," which was it was seen as one of the main lectures of the Tavistock, and it was being highly promoted. And it was, to me, just a whole hour of critical race theory with no balance, and no other references to any other theories. And it was talking about race in a way that was very concerning to me, in that it was making generalizations about all races. I mean, it was generally this idea that white people are inherently bad, It was talking about white people as though they have all the power and all the privilege, but it was also implying that Black people have no agency, and it was it really didn't view people as individuals. So my response to this was to simply say that, while people are entitled to think in this way, there are other ways of thinking, and we need to be aware that we might be treating patients, whether they're Black or white or Asian, who don't like this way of thinking and don't like these ideas, which I thought was quite a reasonable response. And I actually was, after I said that, I was pulled into a meeting and essentially told that was not a correct response, and that it wasn't sufficiently anti-racist. And I was told, I said, well, I'm against racism. I said, my idea of not being racist is not judging a person by the colour of their skin and treating people equally. And the person that pulled me into the meeting essentially said, well, we don't agree with that idea. We see that as discredited, and we now use this new theory of looking at race, and that's what we're teaching here. And if you don't like it, perhaps this course isn't right for you. So I was incredibly surprised at how any opposition or any even just not even disagreement, but just a challenge to these ideas was immediately kind of that there was almost from the start there was a disciplinary kind of tone to how it was being dealt with regards to me. So I said, well, I don't agree with critical race theory. And then after that meeting, it continued to be pushed on to me. They continued to send reading material around that was, I would argue, racist to both Black and white people, and said very generalizing statements about people of all races. And it was being presented as fact. It wasn't being presented as, well, this is a theory, but there are other theories, and you can agree or disagree. So then there was a further meeting about a kind of review of the term so far, and I was asked by the lead lecturer if there was anything that I didn't like so far, and I said, well, I don't like this reading material. It's making statements. It was also making statements about men being inherently sexist, or that all white people are racists. That Black people don't have agency, they can't be held responsible for their actions, that Christianity was a racist religion. And I said, I don't agree with this, and I explained why. And then after that, I essentially had I was threatened with suspension from the course. I was told that if I continued to speak inappropriately about race, I could be barred from the profession of psychotherapy. I sent a letter to my house essentially saying the same thing, that if you speak again in this inappropriate way, you could be suspended. I then challenged this via the complaints procedure, and I said, I'm not comfortable with what's been said. They did an investigation, and the investigation concluded that the theory of whiteness as a system of power and privilege needs to be written into their policies more, not less, and that all students essentially need to find a safe space to challenge and interrogate their whiteness. And they said that that the investigation found that I had spoken inappropriately. And after that, one of the lecturers also made a complaint to my regulatory body as a nurse. So this was my training as a psychotherapist, but separate from that, I work as a nurse. And they contacted the Nursing Midwifery Council, which is the body that allows me to be a nurse, and essentially said that I shouldn't be allowed to be a nurse because of my views on race, and that I had shown that I wasn't able to work with diverse patients. So at this point, I could see that they were trying to essentially hound me off the course, and that I wasn't going to be allowed to complete. It seemed like they weren't going to allow me to complete the training, which is something I was paying for and putting a lot of time and money into. And that's when I initiated legal proceedings against them on the basis of, well, racial harassment, because they kept telling me that I needed to examine my whiteness, and victimization. They later stopped my clinical work with a patient that I was working with and said that they'd found that I was unsafe to work with patients. and so on. And they harassed me in other ways. They sent messages to my phone. They told me that I was unsafe to be in a room with. One of the tutors gave a speech to the other students saying it wasn't safe to be in a room with me. It was kind of the most surreal, nightmarish thing I've ever experienced, and I'm still getting my head around it because it was just crazy. But at the point now, I'm still. They suspended me over a year ago. They said they were going to do an investigation into me to determine whether I'm safe to be with patients. They haven't done that investigation. That was over a year ago. My lawyers have sent them letters saying, why haven't you done the investigation? And they seem to ignore our letters to them, or they say, well, we're going to do a further investigation to determine why there wasn't an investigation. And it's just like a very Kafkaesque nightmare. So at the moment, I'm currently awaiting. I'm in a legal process at the moment. So that's a nutshell of the whole thing.
Yeah, and this is also quite frustrating because you would imagine that if it's health science, nursing, it would be rather more objective and science-based. I could imagine, social science being infiltrated by critical race theory. But do you have any kind of theory why critical race theory managed to kind of infiltrate the NHS? How did it all start? Do you think, Amy?
I think there's a few things. I think it's all of this sped up after the Black Lives Matter protests and riots, and the murder of George Floyd, which is when kind of people became there's legitimate concerns around racism. I'm not saying that, but I think there was a real hysteria around the subject. And I also think that what's happened is a lot of organisations like the NHS are being told that they need to tick boxes for diversity and inclusion and equality, which are all good things ordinarily. But what they do is they outsource, in order to do that, they outsource their training to third parties that are outside, that are not clinicians. And those people come in who are mainly driven by ideology. They're not necessarily objectively looking at things in a scientific way, and they come into the organizations and then they essentially infiltrate the organizations. What they do, although it describes itself as diversity inclusion on the tin, what it actually does is push very radical ideas which are actually discriminatory. They're the opposite of what they claim to be, and then it's very difficult for those organizations to get rid of those organizations, because once they're in, it's it's very difficult for people to, if anybody challenges them, those people get called racist. So I think there's that. And I also just think psychology and psychotherapy more generally, it does have a tradition of, I guess, politically leaning to the left, and in some cases the far left. There's lots of, I don't think those ideas should be shut down. I'm very liberal in that sense. I think there are within psychology there are some very radical ideas that are have been dismissed, but it's useful to know about them and to understand the history of psychology and psychotherapy and why we don't think certain things now, and so on. But I think that there is a tendency of psychologists and psychotherapists to get swept up with the fashions of the day, particularly if it's to do with identity and, as I said, kind of left-leaning politics. So it's lots of things. It's a combination of things. I think it's those are some of the main points I guess I would make as to why it's happening.
Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing is that you would also just predominantly see this on Western countries, like in UK and in the US. It's very unlikely that you would see this in China or even in Southeast Asia. Or even in Japan, like they also have history of colonization. That's also another thing that we have to put into perspective. But just to move on, Amy, because you're very brave to be doing this. You put your career on the line, and I'm not sure if I would be able to do that. But What advice would you give to others to speak out against extreme wokeness? Because it's not just within the NHS, but it's also in academia. Like myself, I'm doing a PhD, and academia is very left leaning. So if you have a different view, it's quite difficult to kind of express your views if it's different. So what's your advice for people who feel that they think they should speak out against this, and why is it important that they do so?
Okay, I guess I would say to be careful. I know that's not a very exciting answer, but I guess if you are going to challenge these ideas, try to do it as calmly and professionally and objectively as you can, even if the people that are saying these ideas aren't being objective and aren't being calm, and are making you, it often is very emotional to be on the receiving end of such bizarre ideas, and it makes you, it can make you angry, it can make you frustrated. I guess it'd be to try to to rise above it, and to that you need to maintain your professional standards and remain calm even when everyone around you potentially isn't. I guess I would say that also there is a lot, from my experience, although it's been how the people reacted to being challenged was very negative. Outside of that bubble, I got loads of support from people. I've had loads of people writing to me, psychologists, psychotherapists, nurses, saying, I completely agree with you. I really support you. I've had loads of organisations that have contacted me and said it's awful what you've been through. I mean, my main worry when I decided to take legal action and knew that it would be in the press was that I'd get loads of backlash. I'd get lots of nasty messages. I was sort of bracing myself for that. And actually, outside of the bubble of the woke institution, all you get is support. Like I haven't really had any negativity. I've just had lots of people saying, God, I'm so sorry you went through that, and just empathizing and just saying, a lot of people feel that they can't say things. I've had lots of people on training courses, on psychology training courses, etc., telling me, it's getting worse, and I feel that I need to speak up, but I don't know if I should, and so on. And I just say to them, just think it through, think very carefully about what you say, and it's a difficult one. It's a very personal one. I wouldn't sort of tell someone that if they don't feel comfortable or they don't feel confident in speaking up. You have to sort of feel intellectually confident in what you're saying, and you need to sort of feel secure in yourself. So it's a very difficult thing. But at the same time, I think it does feel like, to me, there is a bit of a shift. I'm noticing more and more people are feeling a bit more confident in doing that because they're seeing other people doing it. And if you can even push back just slightly, even if it's even if it's just asking a question like, what do you mean by that? Like, just try to challenge someone by, just expressing an interest and saying, well, have you thought about a different position, or have you thought about a different way of thinking? I think it's really important because it gives permission to other people to do the same when you do that. And it might be that there's other people that think the same as you, but they're too scared. So yeah, that would be my advice, I think.
And it's also important that I think we talk about this on mediums like this, on social media, on YouTube, and on podcasts. And you've been quite active. I saw that you also delivered a speech in NCF, New Culture Forum. And I think it generates conversation that what's happening in institutions, in academia, is not acceptable to everyone, and we should be challenging it. So thank you for all those efforts that you're doing, Amy. But I was just wondering how these experiences have affected you on a personal level.
Oh gosh, it has been very difficult. When I was going through it, it felt awful. I couldn't believe it. It did have an effect on my health, on my mental health. I had a lot of sleepless nights. I had moments of real panic and anxiety. I mean, I was very tearful at one point. I was very stressed. I mean, the whole legal process is incredibly stressful, and it's longer and more stressful than I had anticipated, and it's a big risk, financially and emotionally. So it has been huge, the effect it's had on me. I don't like to kind of play the victim too much, but it was very difficult. And it's, as I said, it's a very long process, so I'm still very much in it. I'm very much looking forward to when this is over and it's kind of a previous chapter in my life and I can sort of move on. But it's a very difficult thing, and even going through a complaints procedure is a very difficult thing, but going for a legal case is extremely it's extremely stressful. So it's not for the faint-hearted.
Yeah, I could imagine. I just went to a small claims court
Right.
long time ago, and it's just small claims court. It's a lot of stress, and
It is.
I could imagine it has taken a lot of toll in your mental health. But of course, you're raising funds to support your legal battle. If you just talk more about it.
Yeah, so so you can find me on GoFundMe at /StandUpToWoke. You can find me on Twitter at StandUpToWoke. If you Google my name, Amy Gallagher, or Tavistock or Stand Up to Woke, you should find me. Yeah, I mean, if this goes to trial, it will cost hundreds of thousands of pounds. So at the moment, in terms of the financial side, it's a bit like how long is a piece of string. I don't know how much. We're going to have a cost hearing at some point where I'll get a sense of fully how much it costs. But the estimates that I'm getting from lawyers, that it's going to be hundreds of thousands of pounds. I have so many generous donations so far, which has been amazing. So yeah, if you want to find out more, if you want to donate or just read about the case more, you can Google me and find me. GoFundMe at Stand Up to Woke.
Yeah, the link will be on the description note for everyone who's watching. I'm just curious. You already kind of mentioned this earlier, but do you have any political ideology, or is this more of a personal cause to you?
I guess I would describe myself as maybe. I mean, I don't know that the terms left and right are really useful anymore. I guess I would sit sort of centre right. I guess I'm quite, I think in an interpersonal way, I'm very liberal. I don't like authoritarianism, so I really like, people to be able to be themselves in whatever form that is. But I guess in sort of financial, kind of economically, I guess I'm a bit more conservative. And I'm a Christian, so I guess that tends, I guess I'm quite conservative around things like marriage and children and things like that. But this wasn't, when it started, I wasn't interested in sort of pushing my religious views or my politics onto people. I guess I didn't like that politics were being pushed onto me. As a nurse, I've always maintained, kind of tried to keep my views private. That to me, that is, to be neutral as a clinician is so important. So when I was in this course, I really didn't want to talk about my politics or talk about my religious beliefs. I'd much rather kept that private. I guess when someone keeps pushing something onto you, and it forces it to be about politics, which is not what I wanted. So yeah, I mean, I have my own views, and as everybody does, but I'm certainly not interested in pushing that onto other people. That's what I really don't like. Yeah.
And do you have any regrets about speaking about this?
No, I don't. It has been difficult, but no, I don't. I've met so many amazing people, and it's connected me with so many people. And yeah, I feel like I'm doing the right thing. So in that sense, it feels very meaningful. And as a lot of people who get sort of cancelled or they go through these sorts of things, they often say, although it's very difficult, there's so many benefits in terms of meet, who you meet and opportunities that come out of it, and you can look at yourself in the mirror and feel secure in who you are and what you're doing, and that's really important, to feel like you're speaking the truth, and you can sort of like yourself as a result of that, because if you're just speaking lies, then what's the point?
Yeah, absolutely. And Amy, what does success look like to you when it comes to this advocacy? What do you really want to be changed?
Right. Well, I guess firstly, I'd hope to win my case. I guess that's the first thing. What I'd hoping is that the case can raise awareness and potentially change, push back against this ideologies, particularly in healthcare. So I'm hoping that, I imagine there's going to be more and more disputes like this, and there'll be more legal cases in the future. And that eventually there'll come a tipping point where enough people feel confident to speak up, and then eventually, hopefully, some of the critical race theory will be reduced to just being a theory of the past, and you can teach it as this is what some people thought, but this is why a lot of people disagree with it, and this is why it's been proven to be wrong, and so on, as opposed to this extreme authoritarian dictate that's being pushed onto everyone. So I'd like diversity, equality, inclusion policies and training to be changed. I do think there is a role to think about, definitely to think about prejudice and racism and those things, but in a different way, in a more evidence-based way. I guess those are my main goals at the moment, and hopefully to actually qualify as a psychotherapist at one point.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And Amy, you mentioned something about evidence-based, but do you see any other way that we can teach about past racism without using, CRT theories? Is there any other way that we could teach that to young people, or to the profession?
Yeah, I think I've been speaking with Dr. Dina McMillan, who's creating she's an expert in prejudice and from a psychological perspective, and she sees it in a lot more, not just thinking about, excuse the pun, but black and white terms, but that prejudice is something that anybody can have towards any group. So any person could be prejudiced towards any person, really, and it's not just, although race is an important thing to think about, there's loads of other ways in which you can have any kind of prejudice. It could be a political bias, it could be, not liking a particular religion or a particular person who looks a certain way or an age. And I think in terms of teaching history, I think it's important to teach the good as well as the bad. So yes, there have been terrible things that have happened in the past, but also we've made great progresses. So the civil rights movement, and the suffragette movement, and that particularly a lot of Western societies are more are more freer and more open-minded and more tolerant than they've ever been. That's what a lot of studies show, that we are fortunately becoming less racist and less prejudiced, even though the woke narrative would say otherwise. Actually, there's a lot of evidence to show that we have made great gains, certainly in terms of human rights, legal rights, and I think in just people's attitudes. That's what I would include.
Absolutely, and just on a personal level, I would really support your statement that this is Britain is the least racist country, because
Really?
I lived in 4 countries before I moved here, so I have a point of comparison. Like I live in Thailand, and I would say that Thai people, I'm not generalizing it, but they're far more racist towards people from Burma, than from Myanmar, than Britain to immigrants. And I think we really have to contextualize it, because as you said, we just think about black and white, but there's also such a thing as brown to brown racism.
Yeah,
sometimes you're not aware of it, because we just you think we look like each other, but sometimes we really treat each other differently. And I think that's one way of contextualizing a bigger conversation about racism.
Yeah.
But I'd like to wrap this up on some lighthearted, quick fire question, because this is quite heavy going. So I prepared some 3 questions for you, Amy. So the first one is, what were you afraid of as a child?
Oh my goodness, what was I afraid of? Spiders, I think, which I'm not anymore, but I was. Yeah.
And what is your favorite word in another language?
Ooh. Oh my goodness, that's a difficult one. I like the word. It's a very strange word. In Spanish, I like the word for 20, which is 20. I just like the word.
Okay, it sounds so Spanish. Yeah. And if you didn't become a nurse or psychotherapist, what would you have pursued in your life?
So I paint. That's kind of one of my hobbies. So I guess I would have liked to have done something creative, like being an artist or maybe teaching. Yeah.
And Amy, finally, the floor is all yours. What should people take away from today's conversation? What's next for you?
I guess I'd want people to take away the fact that a lot of people that challenge these ideas aren't necessarily they're just ordinary people that find themselves in very difficult positions, and it's not like, I think it's not like I saw myself as some kind of warrior, or I was really politically motivated, or I think that I'm right and I want my ideas to be put onto people. It's more just trying to create a conversation, and unfortunately we live in times where you can't even have a conversation. So I guess I'd want people to be, I think people that kind of are sort of branded as anti-woke or conservative, they could experience, people can be put into that box, and people can have sort of prejudices about that as well. But really, I'm trying to get away from labels, really. I just want to, I want to be able to connect with all different sorts of people and understand different perspectives. And I think that that's really important, to sort of see the person behind the headlines. And actually, it's often the case that I like difference. I like different. I like hearing different opinions. I like understanding different cultures. And yeah.
That's a lovely message to finish off with, Amy. Amy Gallagher, nurse and psychotherapist. It's been a pleasure to have you here on the DRH show, and I look forward to hearing more about your work.
Thank you, Dennis. It was really nice talking to you.